A mother cuts her own bread ration in half. She gives the extra portion to her daughter. 3 days later, the mother is dead, starved. The daughter survives another week before she collapses in a bread line. She's 8 years old. This is Leningrad, September 1941 to January 1944. 900 days, 3 million people trapped, 1 million dead. This was not merely a siege. It was a calculated attempt to erase an entire city through starvation, one of the deadliest blockades in human history. In the summer of 1941, as Operation Barbarossa unfolded, German forces advanced rapidly across the Soviet Union, cutting deep into its territory. The city of Leningrad, once St. Petersburg, the cradle of the Russian Revolution, and a vital industrial center, became one of Hitler's prime objectives. Its symbolic significance as the former imperial capital and its strategic importance as a hub of arms production and a key Baltic port made it an irresistible target. By late August, German Army Group North, commanded by Field Marshal Wilhelm Ritter von Leeb, had advanced to the outskirts, while their Finnish allies pressed from the north, pushing down from the Karelian Isthmus. On September 8, 1941, German forces captured Schleiselburg, severing the last land connection between Leningrad and the rest of the Soviet Union. The city was surrounded. The siege had begun. Inside the city, nearly 3 million residents were trapped. The Soviet leadership, under the watch of Andrei Zhdanov, prepared for what they anticipated to be a long and brutal struggle. Factories shifted entirely to wartime production, continuing to turn out tanks, artillery, and ammunition, even as bombs rained from the skies. The Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe pounded the city with relentless artillery barrages and air raids, targeting food warehouses, water supplies, and hospitals. The fire. On September 8th, the same day the blockade was sealed, the Germans set ablaze the Badaev warehouses, where much of the city's grain reserves were stored. The destruction was catastrophic, leaving the city with barely a few weeks' worth of food for millions of civilians. By autumn, rations were already dwindling. Bread became the main source of sustenance. Yet even this meager allotment shrank to desperate proportions. By November 1941, official bread rations for ordinary workers were reduced to just 250 grams per day, and for dependents, including children, to 125 grams. The bread itself was no longer pure grain. It was bulked with sawdust, cellulose, and other fillers to make the supply last longer. Hunger turned into starvation, and starvation quickly became the dominant force in the besieged city. The first winter. Entire families perished in their apartments. Corpses lay uncollected in stairwells, and the freezing winds of the Russian winter made survival even harder. The first winter, 1941 to 1942, was the deadliest. Temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Fuel was nearly impossible to find. Public transport ceased to operate. Electricity was cut off. Water had to be gathered from holes cut into the frozen Neva River. People burned furniture, books, and even floorboards for warmth. Hospitals overflowed with the dying, yet there was little medicine to help them. Death from cold, hunger, and exhaustion became an everyday sight. Reports circulated of cannibalism, with Soviet police records documenting hundreds of cases during the darkest months. Culture amid horror. Despite the horror the city endured, cultural life persisted in fragments. Orchestras attempted to perform. Libraries remained open. And even in starvation, some found solace in music and art. Most famously, Dmitri Shostakovich, trapped in the city during the initial months of the siege, composed parts of his Seventh Symphony. Its eventual performance in Leningrad in August 1942 by an orchestra of musicians so emaciated that some collapsed during rehearsals became a symbol of resilience, broadcast across the world. The road of life. Relief, however, did come in a fragile form. Across the frozen surface of Lake Ladoga, the Soviets carved out a tenuous lifeline known as the Road of Life. This icy road was used to transport food and supplies into the city and evacuate civilians. Trucks drove across the frozen lake at night to avoid German air attacks, carrying flour, fuel, and ammunition into the city, while taking out orphans, the wounded, and thousands of residents on their return journey. Yet the capacity was limited, and many perished en route from bombings, thin ice, or exhaustion. Still, without the Road of Life, the city would likely have fallen. It sustained Leningrad, barely, through the harshest months. Failed relief attempts. Meanwhile, outside the city, the Red Army mounted repeated offensives to break the encirclement. In January 1942, the Soviets launched the Lyuban Offensive, hoping to strike south of Leningrad and cut through German lines. Fierce fighting ensued, but the effort ended in disaster, with heavy Soviet losses and no decisive breakthrough. The siege dragged on, and as the months turned to years, Leningrad remained under a death grip, bombarded daily by German artillery from the surrounding countryside. 1942, the year of death. Through 1942, hunger and deprivation remained constant. Deaths numbered in the hundreds of thousands. By the end of that year, estimates suggest that nearly 1 million civilians had perished since the siege began, the vast majority from starvation. And yet, the city continued to resist. The Soviets fortified their positions. Factories still produced weapons, and the Red Army held the Germans from seizing the city outright. Hitler had declared that Leningrad should be wiped from the face of the earth, planning to starve its population and raze its buildings. Yet despite the suffering, the city refused to die. The breakthrough. A turning point came in January 1943. After months of preparation, the Soviet Leningrad and Volkhov fronts launched Operation Iskra. On January 18th, they achieved a breakthrough south of Lake Ladoga, opening a narrow land corridor into the city. Though only a few kilometers wide and constantly under enemy fire, this lifeline allowed for the construction of a supply railway. For the first time in nearly 500 days, Leningrad was no longer completely isolated. Food supplies improved slightly, and the death toll from starvation began to decline. Yet the siege was not over. German artillery still encircled the city, and bombardments continued. Civilians still faced hunger, though less catastrophic than before. The turning tide. Throughout 1943, the Soviet Union, bolstered by victories at Stalingrad and Kursk, gradually shifted the momentum of the war. The Red Army strengthened its positions around Leningrad, preparing for a final push. German Army Group North, increasingly stretched thin, struggled to maintain its lines as resources were diverted to other fronts. Still, the blockade held, and Leningrad remained under siege for another year. Liberation. At last, in January 1944, the Soviets launched a decisive offensive. Operation January Thunder struck German positions to the south and west of the city. The Red Army, with overwhelming artillery and armored strength, smashed through enemy lines. By January 27, 1944, the blockade was fully lifted. Leningrad was free after 872 days of encirclement. Fireworks exploded over the battered city, a rare moment of celebration after years of unimaginable suffering. The cost. Yet the cost was almost beyond comprehension. The siege of Leningrad stands as one of the deadliest blockades in human history. Civilian deaths are estimated at over 1 million, with many more wounded or permanently scarred by starvation and disease. Entire families vanished, leaving behind empty apartments filled with silence. The population that survived bore witness to a tragedy defined by hunger, endurance, and the will to resist annihilation. The city itself had been devastated. Industries damaged, neighborhoods in ruins, cultural landmarks scarred by bombardment. And yet, Leningrad endured. Where Hitler had sought its destruction, its survival became a symbol of Soviet resilience, etched into the memory of the war. The legacy. From September 1941 to January 1944, Leningrad lived through nearly 900 days of nightmare. Those trapped within faced choices no human should be forced to make. Yet they held their city against overwhelming odds. The siege ended not with surrender, but with survival. The people of Leningrad, battered, starved, and frozen, had endured one of the most brutal sieges ever recorded in the history of warfare. And their story remains a stark reminder of both the depths of human suffering and the strength of human endurance. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to History Saga's channel. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.